Welcome to another episode. Today I'm joined by Peter, who's the founder of Reservoir and Relay. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I wanna, how I like to do it is like I just get into it. So you are building Reservoir, which is like NFT trading infrastructure. But at some point you guys were like, okay, we have to also build an intent-based bridging protocol. And you guys decided to build Relay, right? So like, what's the story there?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. But I think the thing to realize about NFTs is even though they're a different token format, you still need to buy them with money, right? With either kind of native tokens or ERC20. So it's always been something that we were dealing with of like what payment tokens are people using to buy these things. And for a long time, we had a buy with any currency kind of swap via Uniswap, these sorts of features. And it was really just as more chains started to emerge. When there was 10 chains, it wasn't that crazy to kind of, I'm going to have a little bit of money on all 10 of these chains. But once it became clear that there were going to be more than 10 chains, it was just very obvious. And I think it's actually fine for the like long tail assets, the NFTs themselves, to be fragmented. You can imagine like a chain for every game, and that game has assets within it. Like it's good for that to be fragmented, for it to kind of avoid the noisy neighbor kind of problem, be able to just have its own world, have its own economy. And you don't really need those NFTs to kind of bridge across chain. They can kind of live on that chain, but then you need money to buy the NFTs with. And that's kind of the piece you less want your money to be fragmented, to have to go kind of park little bits of money on every single chain to be able to purchase it. And so that was kind of like how we got there in terms of, okay, we need to find a way for people to be able to just in time kind of move money across chains and buy things. And that's going to be like a strong need in the future. And as we started to kind of look at bridging protocols and interop protocols, it felt like nothing was really designed for that kind of just in time cross-chain value transfer. It was more like very explicit, large amounts. It would take minutes to do. Maybe the fee would be kind of a lot higher like than the actual value of the thing you're trying to do, like a $5 protocol fee, which is fine if you're moving $1 million, but less fine if you're buying a $1 NFT. And so we just kind of started trying to design a solution for this with these like extreme constraints. So one of our the first customer was Zora, and they literally had $1 NFTs, and they wanted people to be, buy them on their Zora chain. So there's like a few interesting things about this customer. One, they had their own chain that wasn't one of the main chains. So none of the bridges even supported this chain. So that's like the first property of we kind of realized you really need something that can go to every chain. Two, it was a consumer app, so it had to be instant. And that was kind of like the speed of like, I just want this experience if I'm buying this thing. I don't want to wait 2 minutes to see if it's going to complete or not. It might be gone by the time, 2 minutes passes. And then the third element of like, these are really cheap items, $1. And so like, you just need to be hyper aware of the kind of gas usage, fees, efficiency of rebalancing kind of capital. And so kind of that, there were the kind of constraints under which Relay was born. And then we kind of designed it for that customer and was like, oh, this actually just works pretty nicely for someone who just wants to bridge and transfer value across chains and kind of expand it from there.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, Zora was the perfect customer for today's landscape, right? Like, they have a chain of their own. So today we see so many chains launching. They have a need to be like super quick purchases and actually very cost efficient, which is what like the intent-based model just enables. And in a way, you guys build the perfect system in the direction that bridges were heading into, right? So it was kind of like listening to your customer actually worked perfectly here. So even though you were building infrastructure for NFTs, you ended up building also a system for like just anything intense related, because like when people talk about intense, it's always bridging, right? Because that's why the across marketing kind of helped. But it's not just bridging, you're also doing like swaps, you're also doing a bunch of different things to actually enable anything. And today we see so many different companies come up to enable like specific use cases out of all of this, right? So like you guys had a good 2024. Like I've never seen a bridging protocol gain so much adoption so quickly in like 6-10 months. Like within a few months, our users were just banging on our door asking for like, when will you guys integrate Relay? So how do you see 2024 from like your perspective? Like was it a success? Do you feel like you could have done anything more?
Pretty happy. Yeah, I think don't take for granted at all kind of how hard it is to build like a brand new product. I mean, we had obvious benefits from our kind of past work on the Reservoir NFT product. But by the way, that was like kind of entirely developer product. It didn't have consumer facing kind of products or community. And so to build it up from scratch has been pretty rewarding. I think there's always, yeah, to be honest, the only regret is just like the list of things we want to get done is kind of immense of gains, different features. Every time someone goes to integrate it and the questions, it's just embarrassing, the docs and kind of everything that's missing. So other than that kind of side of it, pretty happy kind of, yeah, with how it's gone and then looking kind of good for 2025. Yeah, I think another thing I'm proud of is kind of like building that kind of adoption from the kind of ground up with our, building our own order flow basically. And it's going to be really exciting to kind of see LI.F and kind of bring this like additional kind of order flow and more competitive order flow. But it's kind of pretty sweet to kind of like, there was definitely some correct moves in our strategy of kind of building something unique, tapping into kind of parts of the market that weren't being satisfied. So definitely can't complain, but you look at our volume, we're still kind of like a tiny fraction of some of the bigger players, and so I think there's a long way to go, and there's a ton of unsupported routes and way more to do. We're still kind of a lot of it is just transferring value, where there's so many interesting things to be built around kind of swaps or executing calls and deeper chain abstraction. So still very early in the journey, but definitely can't complain.
Yeah. And one of the things that worked for you guys was just like out of the gates, you were so open about their trade-offs, right? Like I've never seen a bridge just embrace their trade-offs so openly, like because everyone tries to kind of hide it under the rug, right? Like, but you guys came out and you were like, we are running our own solver. It's mentioned in the docs, and that's why it's fast, right? Like, because we're optimizing for low cost and latency. So how do you think that worked out for you guys? And like, what was the thinking behind that strategy? Because like trade-offs are usually hidden and you took the opposite approach there.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One is that we had a very clear kind of like plan, and we're kind of like on the path of kind of how our design can be decentralized, right? So rather than just like we're going to build a centralized bridge and like that's the end of the story, I think it makes a big difference to kind of have kind of a credible path to it being decentralized. And then it's a kind of a question of when you prioritize some of these things, not to mention like if nobody cares in the centralized form, like why even build the decentralized? And I'd say the other thing is we've learned a ton just being in the market and the sort of features that people demand. And we've had the advantage of like iterating on the protocol design a lot over the last year, and it's just going to be a lot better and support all of these different kind of use cases versus ossifying that too early. And but yeah, I think that's what gives us the confidence to not be embarrassed by it either. Where it's also just in terms of like why decentralize, it's less about kind of just to kind of like tick a box, but it's like you want to decentralize to have scale, where just like a single solver, for example, is just like not going to have the same level of liquidity. You want to do it for kind of liveness and censorship resistance. It's like there's all these kind of reasons it's really important to do. But for the last year, like those weren't the bottlenecks. The bottlenecks were kind of solving kind of how you can move quickly to new chains, how, thinking about the UX and even just things like what's the refund experience when things don't quite go right? How can you get the gas as low as possible? And so we were just able to, in some ways, handle the supply ourselves, and then we could just focus a lot of attention on kind of demand and what were their needs without trying to build two sides of the market at once. But I think 2025 is going to be very much about building the supply side of the market, all the lessons we've kind of learned from the trenches running our solver, and the needs of that is kind of what we're going to see a lot of in 2025. I think the other thing is that this sort of what it takes to be a solver, in some ways, like we actually don't plan to kind of like try and like back away and then walk away from doing this. In many ways, like we're a solver first. Our history is as a kind of infrastructure company for applications building things like Zora, and it's like what are their needs, and they kind of really care about kind of speed and kind of like what the experience is for their users, especially when things kind of go wrong, keeping costs as low as possible. And we're really good at that. And in a way, we kind of like, you can think of us almost as a company delivering a service first and then designing a protocol, like the protocol that we wish existed that we would kind of want to solve for. And as we build that protocol out and kind of bring other solvers in to make it better, I don't think we're going to, step away from doing that, because we're good at it and we like doing it, and we think it's an important piece. So I think that's kind of like a difference between us maybe and other protocols, where they see their protocol solver as like, oh, this is like a temporary thing, let's bootstrap the market and then kind of walk away. I think it's actually something we're kind of proud of and we'll keep doing, because that's one of the lessons of like these larger apps. Yeah, they care about things like completion rate, and maybe they don't need kind of 1,000 solvers and it's extremely decentralized. They obviously want these like guarantees around liveness and these other kind of important reasons for decentralization. But probably the thing that matters most is like latency. It's kind of like this thing never goes down. It's extremely kind of low cost. These sorts of factors, and we're kind of like, that's kind of in our DNA to kind of deliver a good experience there.
I mean, it makes sense, right? Like you guys have kind of built the perfect solver in-house, right? So that's basically your edge at this point, because that's the entire protocol, especially in the beginning. And as you kind of scale up, I don't see any reason why you should abandon it at all, because you've gained the expertise to actually maybe open source it and let other people also build really competitive solvers. Like, do you see that happening? Like, do you guys think you will open source some of the tech so that other people can build competitive solvers on Relay, or is it more like, or do you see yourself more like also running it on Relay, but maybe competing in other intent systems at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting. I think we definitely, we certainly don't want to kind of like give ourselves some sort of preferential treatment. And it could be that like once it gets to the point where truly there are just better solvers than us, we can't even compete anymore. Like and the quality is just kind of so high that we're no longer contributing something. But I also think you have like different profiles of solvers. You'll have kind of solvers that are really good at kind of like major routes, and they just have way more liquidity, and they're willing to quote tighter, and they're maybe market making somewhere else, and they can take price risk. And so you've got all these different profiles. Whereas I would describe our solver as just being really good at going to the frontier, being on chains day one, kind of providing like baseline liquidity. And that just might be a need kind of like forever. That we're just kind of like, that's our specialty, and kind of we have experience running infrastructure on many chains and automating that as much as possible, and kind of dealing with bad RPCs and kind of like handling that. That's just kind of our company's specialty. It was the same on the NFT side. That was our strategy, was to go to the frontier of chains. And so I think it'll be a mix. We'll definitely be open sourcing pieces and kind of encouraging others, but I think others will just be better at us in kind of various categories. And then the last thing I'll say is, I think there's like different layers of the stack, where there's kind of the like solving and like the kind of means in which you're settling the order between the kind of solver and the user. And then there's kind of this like another really interesting world, which is like liquidity for solvers and how they rebalance and all these other pieces. And we will probably, we're thinking about solutions for kind of like the whole stack, because if you really want the best liquidity, you need to think about all of these layers. And so I think, we'll see how it plays out, but it's definitely like a powerful piece to have kind of, and be able to apply that where necessary. And one way to think about it is like our solver effectively bootstrap supply, kind of so that we could build up demand of kind of people wanting to bridge and swap. And as we start to think about kind of like supply for solvers and how kind of solvers manage their liquidity, our solvers bootstrapping demand for those protocols. And then over time, maybe kind of our solver is less important, but we've managed to kind of bootstrap these two sides kind of. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it.
I think the industry is moving in that direction, right? Like there's even in the bridging landscape, I feel like everyone is going down this path where they started small, but they're now expanding their solver network. And with the way the ecosystem is evolving with like so many chains and like apps becoming chains, there's really no other way to kind of scale other than this. Like, okay, you run your solver first and then you bootstrap demand. If there's enough demand, other solvers can come in and make it more competitive, right? So the question that I keep asking myself is like, how do these systems differentiate among themselves, right? Like, what's the edge for one over the other, right? So, like, I'm wondering if you've thought about it, because in my head, it's maybe like who can be there first, who can run a better solver, and then at the end of the day, it comes down to maybe business development for some of these chains, right? But how do you think about this?
Yeah, I think there's like a couple of things. At least I can talk about like how we try and differentiate ourselves. I think on the protocol design, we've taken like a pretty extreme choice, where in some ways we really optimize for UX. We really optimize for maybe kind of lower amounts and how you can do those as quickly and as cheaply as possible. And if you're going to move $10 million, probably shouldn't use Relay for that. And like I don't think it's possible to have kind of like the perfect solution for every like a single thing covering everything. So for us, we really want to kind of own that area of it's going to be the most extreme on speed and cost, and also on expansion, where it can just be everywhere day one, even if it's a different VM. They're kind of like the three things we really care about. And so I think there are like fundamental protocol design differences, like how frequently are you settling? What's the capital efficiency for solvers? Are you kind of, do I only get my money every 2 hours, or do I get my money immediately after I fill? So there are like meaningful differences that kind of impact a solver. There are meaningful differences of like, can you actually go to this chain? It's like not ETH, it's a different gas currency. Like, so are there like, you know, so I think there's like the fundamental protocol design, but that can obviously get copied. And then I think it just kind of comes down a little bit to like culture and just kind of how fast you move, how much risk you kind of comfortable taking. A little bit of BD, how kind of, what your relationships are like to kind of these other teams building those chains. Do they trust you? Have you built a good relationship with users as well? So yeah, I think it's a mix of tech and execution. But I don't think it's kind of, I think it'll kind of definitely kind of like maybe ossify into categories. But I don't think everything's kind of like a commodity. There's enough choices you need to make, and that results in like different kind of areas on the trade-off spectrum, people can own.
I mean, so when I think about it, it's like there are 3 or 4 parameters that can potentially help one intent protocol differentiate from the other. Like it sounds simple, but they, like you said, it fundamentally changes like how capital efficient it is, like how much it's going to cost, right? Like, so you guys built a very like lightweight infrastructure that can scale to different chains. So it's going to show up in the cost and speed, right? If you change the number of solvers in the system, it's going to show up in the codes. And if you kind of like change how quickly or how slowly solvers can rebalance on your protocol, again, it's going to make a difference, right? So these things sound simple, but I feel like these are the 3 or 4 parameters where differences will start showing up, and maybe we'll see like intent-based protocols specialized across routes in a way. And the other model to kind of scale to newer chains is the token standard model, right? So like we have all of these interop protocols with layer 0, hyperlane, wormhole, axelar. Like everyone has their token standard, and the pitch there is to like make these tokens the chain's canonical tokens, right? And Stargate is probably the perfect example of like balancing AMMs with interop token standards in Hydra, and that's the competition for intent-based models. Like how do intents compete with a token or like a bridge that has the rights to issue the token, right? Like you can just mint the token at any amount or like any size. So like you said, if you want to bridge $10 million, maybe intents are not the way to go. But with OFTs or like Hydra, you can practically mint any amount of tokens. So how do you see like that competition dynamic shape up?
Yeah, I think first of all, they're not mutually exclusive because even with the token standards, it's not going to be as fast as intents. And just to clarify, it could be. There's nothing stopping a token standard kind of relaying the messages in a second. It's just risky. So I think the way the way to think about it is like who takes on the risk, and you can kind of have this like spectrum from global risk, which means all token holders take on the risk, right? So if like the default kind of like security of the token is sending messages too fast and not waiting to see if the origin chain finalized, then that's kind of taking on global risk, because if it sent a message and then there was a reorg, then kind of everyone, all token holders kind of suffer. And then you can have like a middle ground, which is what I would argue kind of like Stargate pools, like the main Stargate product is, which is you've got LPs that opt into kind of like taking some pooled risk basically, and they're kind of like, so in the classic Stargate, you can move USDC from kind of base to Arbitrum, and you've got these pools and kind of messages are passed. And once I complete my bridge kind of from base to Arbitrum, I've just got native Circle USDC, nothing to do with Stargate. Stargate just helped me get from A to B. And so like I'm actually taking kind of temporary risk maybe like whilst the bridge is in progress, but once I get my funds on the other side, like I'm taking no risk. Whereas the people who have pooled in Stargate, are taking some risk around kind of what Stargate is. So that's kind of like the middle ground of like a group of actors is taking some risks, and you can go faster in that, but you still maybe don't want to go too fast because you've got like a set of actors that kind of don't want, you're still kind of like they're acting as a group, and so you kind of need consensus over like let's at least wait like a safe period. And then what's interesting about intents is you have like the extreme where it's like a single actor, a single solver is taking all the risks themselves. They're basically saying, oh, cool, I've seen this transaction on the origin. I'm not going to wait any confirmations. I'm just going to go. And the only person that loses if the solver goes too quick and then there's a reorg is the solver themselves. And so you kind of isolate the risk in that one solver. And that's why, kind of generally speaking, intents can be faster because you can isolate the risk. So there's nothing stopping a token standard going fast or a pool-based system going fast, but they generally, because it's like shared risk, you kind of are more conservative. But when you have isolated risk, you can go faster. So long story short, that's kind of why solver kind of intent protocols can be faster. And so, for example, Ape Chain, where kind of all of the assets are OFT on that, we still do a lot of volume as like a fast instant layer on top of the kind of 2-minute time that you can kind of move Ape between Arbitrum, Ethereum, and Ape Chain. So like I think the two of them still fit together nicely in terms of it's not like token standards are going to replace kind of intent standards. In many ways, it makes our life of rebalancing way easier. I'd much rather kind of 2 minutes to rebalance my inventory than 7 days. But it certainly maybe kind of like squeezes the value prop, and so you're just kind of like a thin layer on top. But I still think for most users they're better off going via the intent protocol than directly to the underlying bridge, and that's generally my kind of view on it. Where like the canonical bridges, whether it's a built-in rollup bridge or a kind of interop protocol token standard, are kind of like the wholesale kind of rails. And end users should almost never need to use those. They'll kind of always use almost like it's equivalent to kind of bank, the kind of bank to bank transfers. But then you've got the credit card network, and most users are just doing most of their transactions in the credit card network, and banks are settling kind of between them. And I think there's a similar analogy with bridging. So I do think the two of them fit together quite nicely. And then it is though interesting to think about. Whether chains, it's kind of a funny thing basically where securing assets is kind of like the whole point of blockchains. And so it's an interesting thing that I'm still trying to wrap my head around if it's a good thing or not, that you have like increasingly assets that aren't actually secured by the chain they're secured by like the DVN that they're kind of, or the ISM of the token standard. And I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with it. I think there's definitely like a lack of visibility. Like I have no idea what the Layer Zero Labs DVN is. Like, is that a multisig? Like how, like, do you know what it is? Like there's like not as much visibility. Like there needs to be like a L2 beat for DVNs basically, and a bit more kind of understanding of like what the security is there. And so I think that's one of my kind of criticisms of just like it's very opaque, and in some ways you're foregoing kind of like roll-ups have this like multi-year research to figure out a way that you can have a less trusted sequencer, but you're still inheriting the security of Ethereum. And then people are like, oh, just ship it with a DVN, Layer Zero Labs, that'll do. And it's like you're not even taking advantage. It's not secured by the roll-up at that point or by Ethereum. It's secured by kind of the lowest risk. So yeah, I think there's some criticism, but like I very much get the kind of appeal of it. They're like native multi-chain, and it does actually make intent protocols easier to layer on top. And I think they both fit together. But I think the last thing I'll say is canonical bridges, like roll-up bridges, are getting better. Like zero-knowledge ones are kind of coming down from 24 hours. I think ZK Sync came down to 3 hours. You're seeing optimistic roll-ups kind of like consider replacing or like complementing the 7-day optimistic challenges with kind of ZK, kind of like succinct, OP succinct, these sorts of things. And so I think it'll be interesting to see if the kind of canonical bridges, if they get better, if there's like less of a reason to kind of like take the risk on a third party kind of DVN securing your token, if you get kind of like pretty good roll-up bridging, although that's not going to get you to somewhere like Solana. But I think one of the nice things about intents is because they solve a lot of the users' pain points in terms of getting a really good UX, you can maybe then, when you're thinking about your token, not take as much risk in the token. Like just use the canonical bridge. True, it might be slow and expensive to bridge it, but intents are going to solve most of the pain points. And so you can keep the kind of global risk as low as possible. Anyone holding the token is kind of not assuming a ton of risk if intents can kind of solve most of the UX problems on top. But there's still, the intents are actually going to cost more on top of a canonical bridge with a 7-day withdrawal than an intents on top of a kind of OFT with a 2-minute withdrawal. So there's absolutely trade-offs. And we'll see how it plays out. And yeah, I'm still wrapping my head around it, and I can definitely see the advantages of it. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think you've touched on so many different threads here. So let's say like intents are for users, right? Like that's I think everyone has a good understanding that intents and chain abstraction are solutions for users, and they make user experience just so much better than it was 2 years ago, right? But when it comes to the developers, chains, and ecosystems, that's where the interop token standards kind of come into the picture, right? So you mentioned a few different points. So like there's concerns about like shared security of interop protocols, but I feel like chains themselves are not that secure anyway, right? Like they're also running their own sequencer. So at this stage, I'm also of the opinion like these interop protocols have been running for multiple years. They're improving their security. So the shared security standard is actually improving.
Just to jump in, I'm sure the protocols that that one interesting thing is people often say like Layer Zero is very secure. And I'm sure Layer Zero is extremely secure. It's almost like every DVN needs to be evaluated on its security. And by the way, Layer Zero Labs DVN is incredible track record, securing a ton of value. It probably is more secure than most L2s. But yeah, anyway, sorry to interrupt, but it is kind of like another pet peeve of like, it's almost like people say, and we're secured by Layer Zero and kind of like, but actually it's like this modular kind of like different, which is, Layer Zero is not hiding that. It's like the core features that you can have like different levels of security. But again, it's almost like we need that like stage 1, stage 0, stage 2, like clearer ways to like grok, like what is the actual security?
Yeah. I mean, so I kind of lump up every different design into this, but like if you think about it, Axelar is their own chain, right? So I would definitely argue Axelar as a chain is so much more secure than some of these new rollups, right? And you're right in saying that, okay, when we're talking about Layer Zero or Hyperlane, and we need to kind of assess the risks of these specific DVNs or ISMs, and I feel like it will happen at some point. But then if you argue like which is more secure and robust, Layer Zero's DVN or some of these sequencers, I'm probably going to vote for like Layer Zero's DVN, right? So I feel like In general, the security standard is improving, and at this point, I don't see why we should not have interop token standards see more adoption because of the benefits, right? Like you're right in saying the native bridges are getting better, so the speed will improve. But then there's still no way for us to get assets from like Solana to this new rollup, right? And the only way to do that is through some of these token standards. So I feel like intents and token standards and like interop protocols, they're all improving in the right direction, and there's a world where both of them win eventually.
Right. Yeah. Even in the world where token standards, all tokens are issued on multi-chain token standards and secured by kind of effectively, yeah, you're decoupling the security of the token from like any one chain, and it's kind of got this separate security, which is fine if that's really secure. Even in that world, I think you'll still have intents for that reason that you don't want to push the speed too high on the kind of token standard, because then that's global risk of all token holders if you make a mistake there. So it's like nice to be able to kind of like keep it conservative and then layer on intents.
Okay. So the next kind of subtopic that I want to talk about is chain abstraction and like L2 interop in general, right? So even before the recording, I was talking about how in your announcement back in Feb for Relay, you touched on all of the right like words for chain abstraction, laid out the vision and mission, and like it's basically everything that you would read today from a new chain abstraction protocol launching. Uh, and you had one of your tweets which said like there are, when you look at the chain abstraction ecosystem, there are two groups, right? Like one is the teams that appear in ecosystem maps and like thought pieces, and the other is like the teams that are actually shipping chain abstraction. So I'm kind of curious to get your read of the chain abstraction ecosystem and like how it's shaping up today, and just like what inspired that observation.
Yeah, I think there's a few things here. Like going back to the origin story, definitely like that was the vision of like you should be able to have money in one place, spend it everywhere, like just in time, bridging, chain abstraction, unified balances, and just kind of like in many ways the world wasn't ready for it. Like in the same way that kind of people still use EOAs, they also still just like to explicitly bridge. And yeah, I mean, another like funny anecdote is that we did not even like think we were building a bridge. It was actually like Zora's like, oh, can you also just do the instant cross chain thing for our L2 for people getting off our L2? I was like, oh, I guess so. You know, like it hadn't even crossed our mind. You know, I think it's like that thing that people say of like you need like naive, like the naivety to kind of get in. Like we didn't like go like let's compete in bridging. Like no, I mean that seemed like a very competitive world, but all of a sudden, you know, next thing we knew we were building a bridge, even though that kind of wasn't the intention. So I think like chain abstraction's always been kind of what we wanted to do, but the reality is that right now, kind of people still bridge and people still use EOAs, and we wanted to build really good solutions for that. And I think bridging and chain abstraction, they both just need really good cross-chain liquidity. And so we can focus on satisfying needs today, and they'll be kind of like and build up the best liquidity that will then be able to power chain abstraction. And I would argue that chain abstraction is just hard mode where it has to be extremely cheap, extremely fast, support every asset. When things go wrong, kind of you don't get weird intermediary assets. Otherwise, the illusion breaks. And so it's almost like we have to go solve easy, like bridging is easy mode, basically, of like people are, they don't mind if it takes 2 minutes, they don't mind if it takes an hour. Like this just felt so easy, kind of like coming from like trying to solve chain abstractions. In many ways, we're like building up through bridging as easy mode, and swapping and kind of like how you can support any currency, any chain. And that said, we're starting to get to the point where those applications are coming along that are trying to build chain abstraction use cases. And the idea is that we, you know, now have that extremely high quality liquidity that they need, the kind of bar that they need. And so we're working with a lot of those teams. And I think that's kind of my comment that I was making, was that like in some ways, like chain abstraction is almost like not like a separate thing. It's like it's just bridging, or it's just like cross-chain liquidity and routing, but just doing it extremely well. And then, you know, so I think there's like a ton of people kind of like, waxing about kind of like fancy kind of new chain abstraction designs, but kind of feels like we're in the trenches, actually kind of building the pieces.
It's almost like how magicians have sleight of hand. Like they'll do something so quickly that to the end user it looks like magic, but behind the scenes they're moving so many different parts, right? So I feel like chain abstraction is that sleight of hand for magicians, but behind the scenes there are teams that are pulling so many different strings to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, like we were kind of working through something around this. I was having a conversation about it yesterday, where like under the hood, you might just have like many USDC balances, but we're like solving this problem where it gets fragmented even more. And there's actually like a parallel to UTXOs on Bitcoin, where like you don't have a Bitcoin balance. You've got actually all these like tiny coins of like mixed sizes, and your wallet just abstracts them, shows them as one. When you go to send money, it's like automatically picking which UTXO to spend. So it's just a UX layer thing. That's actually kind of, I don't really think there are chain abstraction protocols. It's more of a kind of product level, tooling level thing of like building abstraction on top of really good liquidity and routing. And it has to be so good. And also data indexing. You need to kind of like understand which tokens are equivalent, be indexing the balances of all of them. So it's kind of like all of this stitching together. But yeah, we're kind of getting there, and you're seeing things like resource locks, which we were kind of thinking about a very long time ago before they were called resource locks. All of these things we kind of like almost put on hold because the demand just wasn't there. But it's exciting to see that kind of like it feels like time. You're seeing like these really nice apps, like Infinex and all these kind of apps building kind of like chain abstracted Coinbase, kind of on-chain Coinbase, and it's definitely ramping up. But yeah, it's going to take like extremely good liquidity, and even Relay is just like far from good enough. Like another interesting thing is when you're doing cross-chain swaps, the classic way that kind of Li.Fi does as well is like you can do a swap on the origin, then you kind of do a same chain kind of bridge and a swap on a destination to effectively go any to any. But this actually can cause, challenges where if you're trying to do chain abstraction, like it's almost kind of like Schrodinger's box, like as soon as you view the cat, it kind of like locks the state, right? So as soon as you've like swapped, because it's non-atomic, so you've done the swap on the origin, you want to fill on the destination, and then that fails because they're trying to mint an NFT and it's minted out. It's like too late. You've already got, what are you going to do? You're going to swap back? Well, now you've just lost money. And so like you need to, again, like that's easy mode, just doing a swap on the chain. So you need to almost like support native kind of swapping and find solvers that are willing to take inventory again, like to create that magic.
It's almost like there are too many steps, right? So whenever there are many steps, something can go wrong at any step, and you can't just like go back, or like you have to go back to step one to just like restart, right? So it's just a very hard problem to solve, and I think like intents are a very clean solution to kind of overcome a lot of these steps, and in the worst case, at least overcome these steps for the users, and we can do them in the background, right? So like in 2025, like what's your plan to make sure that Relay is also appearing on the ecosystem maps and thought pieces? Like I know you guys are building the tech, the traction shows that it's getting adoption, but there's like the other side of like building a company, building a brand, and like how are you guys approaching it this year?
Yeah, well, there was another bridge that got really famous from just winning a bunch of Li.Fi order flow and sharing those charts. So maybe that's our plan. But no, I think we're going to do a bunch of stuff this year. Yeah, I think kind of working with teams like yourself to kind of get additional distribution. I think we just got ourselves added to DeFi Llama because we needed to do a kind of PR there. So just finding the time to get around to some of these things, like they weren't a priority, but they're becoming a priority. Kind of really working on the protocol and bringing in additional solvers. All of these things tie together. Additional solvers will mean additional capacity. That'll mean we'll be able to do more volume. We can appear higher on various charts. More people start to notice. So I think there's like a nice cycle there. We've just raised money. We're hiring people. So all of these good things kind of coming together. But I think also a lot of the same. I think the strategy is working. We're just kind of we like the challenge of kind of being on the frontier, just being everywhere, kind of day one. But then also just like, there's actually like a bunch of like smaller bridges that go to like a lot of chains, but then they're like severely constrain the amount you can do. And so it's like, that's kind of like one of our challenges of really just like enabling any size, any token, anywhere. So yeah, I think a lot of the same, but then also trying to kind of got to get in those ecosystem maps, very important.
Awesome. I feel like you've had a really strong year, 2024, and you're in a very good position. And I love seeing some of these stories, right? Like the fact that Relay was not even live in Feb 2024, and today we're like talking about how you can expand to all of these chains and how you're building some of this like really cool stuff that can unlock chain abstraction eventually. I practically live for these stories. So really excited to see how you guys progress from here, and also like of course really excited to have Relay finally integrated into Li-Fi and Jumper, and like hope we can do some great work there.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.